Texting.
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 Texting. Texting. Texting. Texting.
Texting.
Texting.
Mark, Will, and Tomek present
Texting.
Footnote to Howl. Holy, 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 holy. The world is holy. The soul is holy. The skin is holy. The nose is holy. The tongue and cock and hand and asshole holy. Everything is holy. Everybody's holy. Everywhere is holy. Every day is in eternity. Every man's an angel. The bum's as holy as the seraphim. The madman is holy as you, my soul, are holy. The typewriter is holy. The poem is holy. The voice is holy. The hearers are holy. The ecstasy is holy. Holy Peter, Holy Alan, Holy Solomon, Holy Lucian, Holy Kerouac, Holy Hunk, Holy Burroughs, Holy Cassidy, Holy the unknown buggard and suffering beggars, Holy the hideous human angels. Holy my mother in the insane asylum, Holy the cocks of the grandfathers of Kansas, Holy the groaning saxophone, Holy the bop apocalypse, Holy the jazz bands, marijuana hipsters, peace peyote pipes and drums. Holy the solitudes of skyscrapers and pavements. Holy the cafeterias filled with the millions. Holy the mysterious rivers of tears under the streets. Holy the lone juggernaut. Holy the vast lamb of the middle class. Holy the crazy shepherds of rebellion. Who digs Los Angeles is Los Angeles. Holy New York, Holy San Francisco, Holy Peoria and Seattle, Holy Paris, Holy Tangiers, Holy Moscow, Holy Istanbul. Holy time in eternity, holy eternity in time, holy the clocks in space, holy the fourth dimension, holy the fifth international, holy the angel in Moloch. Holy the sea, holy the desert, holy the railroad, holy the locomotive, holy the visions, holy the hallucinations, holy the miracles, holy the eyeball, holy the abyss. Holy forgiveness, mercy, charity, faith, holy, ours, bodies, suffering, magnanimity. Holy the supernatural, extra brilliant, intelligent kindness of the soul.
Holy shit!
Welcome to another episode of Texting with me, Tomek, and Ultsing.
And I'm Mark Will in Taipei.
Oof.
Where are you now?
I am in Ultsing. I've worked on the pronunciation of that. It's spelled Ulcinj, and it's a coastal city very close to Albania in Montenegro.
Okay, you're in Montenegro now. Last time you were in Estonia.
Yes, so international tour. Feeling like a bit like a bum because I still have some insecurity about my Russian visa, but fingers crossed, everything's gonna be okay. So, how are you doing?
What's next on the itinerary?
Next is return to the UK because my visa's been delayed, so I couldn't get it the first time around. Return to the UK and then find a way back to Russia. So, yeah, here for a couple weeks.
Holy Moscow.
Holy Moscow, exactly. I'm glad Ginsberg shouted out Russia there. Not all is ill there. So, yeah, how are you doing?
Oh, we won't get into that.
Okay. Well, we will get into...
But I'm surviving.
Okay, good. Who speaks of victory? Survival is all. That's a Rilke quote that I live by.
That's a what?
A Rilke quote.
Oh, Rilke, okay.
Yeah, Rilke. Yeah.
Nice.
It's a good one for dark moments of the soul.
Yeah. Well, actually, William Carlos Williams, in the introduction to the poem we're looking at today, has something to say about that. But we'll get to that in a minute.
Okay.
Let's get started with your precious Ginsberg.
Yes, let's do it.
Do you remember that?
No.
Okay.
Is that a reference?
Yeah, it's a reference to Co-Reality number 1.
Okay. What kind? Yeah. This is in one of our back and forths, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was clowning on you.
You're dunking on me, as the younger generation would say. Yeah. Okay, so quick intro to Ginsberg for those of you who maybe aren't so familiar. Allen Ginsberg was an American poet born in 1926 in Newark, New Jersey. He formed close relationships with prominent writers William Burroughs, Jack Kerouac, and other voices from the Beat generation. The poem we'll be discussing today, Howl, was written in 1954-1955, was published in 1956 by San Francisco publishing house City Lights. Soon afterwards, it became the subject of an obscenity trial because of its explicit references to drugs and gay sex. And supported by the ACLU, the publisher Lawrence Ferlinghetti won the case, and the California State Superior Court Judge Clayton Horn decided that the poem was of redeeming social importance. So let's start maybe by just discussing the term beatnik and maybe how you understand it.
Well, I mean, in the dedication of Howl and other poems, the City Lights edition, you've got the major beats mentioned. Ginsberg dedicates the publication of Howl and other poems to Kerouac, Burroughs, and Neal Cassady, who is also referenced in Howl itself.
And Cassady is the hero of On the Road, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, as Dean Moriarty, right?
Right, exactly.
But in Howl, he's mentioned as NC, secret hero of these poems, Coxman and Adonis of Denver.
Nice.
And the mention of Denver is interesting because I remember when I read On the Road, I had this urge. I've never been to Denver, strangely enough. Have you?
I did a drive-through, and I think Denver was on my mind in terms of the beats. Yeah, just the drive-through going towards Chicago from Phoenix.
Yeah, well, it's in On the Road, as I recall. I mean, it's very much like the beatnik Mecca, so I always wanted to visit. Who knows what it's like now, but I always had that interest in it because it features so prominently in On the Road.
I mean, not to the same degree maybe as like San Francisco, but yeah, it's one of the major spots that you'd want.
in On the Road, it I would say it's. I mean, it's been a while since I read it, but as I recall, Denver was like one of the most important locations because it's where Dean Moriarty, a.k.a. Neal Cassady, is from, right? So it was kind of a central locus, I guess. See what I did there with that fancy term for
I like it.
Location or place.
Okay.
But if we're talking about the beats...
Yeah, give the listeners like a brief intro into the beat generation, maybe.
Well, I mean, you can probably do that better than I can. But for me, I mean, is Burroughs really a beat? I mean, to me, of all of these people mentioned, Kerouac, Burroughs, I've never read anything that Neal Cassady wrote, but apparently he wrote something, an autobiography. Right. It says, Ginsberg, who else do we have? Is Gary Snyder
Gary
a
Snyder,
beat?
absolutely.
Yeah.
Jaffe Ryder in Dharma Bums.
Okay. I do like Gary Snyder. But, you know, Burroughs, in terms of influence on me, it far surpasses any kind of influence the others have had on me. And that's a recent development. I didn't really discover Burroughs, as it were, until recently, like within the past 5 to 10 years. I mean, of course, I had read excerpts or whatever, but I became like a Burroughs disciple or fanatic within the past 5 to 10 years, and I've read not everything, but a lot. I've read a lot of Burroughs, and
I wish you'd come to visit me then when I was living in Morocco, because
I wish I had too. And when I was in Spain and took the ferry over to North Africa, I tried to go. That didn't work
I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah, that didn't work out for various reasons, but that's a great regret of mine. I wish I had visited you when you were there, and I wish I could have gone myself.
I stayed a night in a place called Hotel Muniria. I don't know if it had the same name at the time, but it's where Burroughs.
It was the Beat Hotel. The Beat Hotel, right? Wasn't that what it was called?
I don't know. Today it's called Hotel Muniria, but I stayed there, and it's supposed to be the site of where he wrote Naked Lunch.
Yeah,
and they still have like a lot of pictures of the beats downstairs and stuff like that. So it was a really cool experience.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, again, can you maybe give a little bit more context of, or I can jump in if you want.
Well, I think you should. I mean, the phrase itself it was coined by Kerouac, right?
So, I think this is like a controversial topic. Like when I was reading today, it says it was actually coined by a journalist, and he blended the name of the Russian satellite Sputnik and Beat Generation. And this suggested that beatniks were far out of the mainstream of society and possibly pro-communist.
Okay.
But the term beat...
Not completely inaccurate, I guess.
I mean, the term beat, I've heard various interpretations. One, I think Ginsberg liked to connect it to like the idea of beatitude, which I don't exactly remember what that means, but I think it's something about like pure, right? Do you know the term beatitude? I know like there are the Beatitudes. I'm just doing a quick... So
it's blessedness.
Yeah, blessedness. Okay, so I think that's like the kind of interpretation that Ginsberg preferred because of his like own spiritual quests.
Okay, well that makes sense, but I always thought it was like the beat of the jazz music that Kerouac liked.
Ah, interesting. Because I want to throw in another interpretation, which is like beat as in exhausted, like finished with particularly what was going on at the time, like the war and like industrial fatigue. So it's more like, yo, I'm beat, like I'm dead.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that people have taken it different directions, but we've already just given 3 interpretations.
Let's get even more crazy. Be at.
Yeah.
Be at. Whether it's Denver or Tangiers or I don't know, San Francisco, Berkeley.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the be-ness, that would be like a very kind of like Eastern influenced concept, right? Like being, there's the book by Ram Dass, Be Here Now, which kind of came out of that same time period.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, just beingness. So I guess I'll just add a little bit. So the Beat Generation is usually associated with post-World War II. It's a rejection of standard narrative in favor of a more like improvised, spontaneous creativity. There's the famous expression that Jack Kerouac is said to have coined, which is first thought, best thought, which we might want to discuss.
Do you agree
later.
with that? Let's discuss it now.
All right.
I mean, that's a very jazz concept, right? Like
right.
Improvisation.
And coming back to the B thing, you know, the type of jazz that they were listening to was bebop. So yeah. Yeah, do I agree? I think I was watching an interview with Gary Snyder, and he kind of distanced himself from that concept a little bit, and he said it's more like ethos than an actual, like, you have to live by it as a gospel. Like, it's a general direction. So I would say at times I have tried to do the first thought, best thought, especially when I was in my early 20s, and I was very much, like, fashioning myself after the beats. So my biography as a writer.
Oh, I do remember.
Yeah, I guess, but even before like co-reality days, I mean, there was one point where I wrote all over my wall back in Phoenix, and it was like a piece that was basically just, yeah, just stream of consciousness. So I think it's like beautiful. Now I'm more reluctant to write that way. I think I have a different interpretation to, like, a different relationship to my spontaneity now. I think I'm not as comfortable with what my spontaneous mind thinks, unfortunately. So it's like I don't necessarily want to give it voice because it's so dark that I don't really want to go there. Sometimes it's like I kind of need to filter it and work through it.
Yeah.
That's one thing. But yeah, I mean, I think it produces a type of writing, but it's like, yeah, everything has its place, right? Like improvised jazz is good sometimes, but sometimes you want to listen to a piece that's more polished and written. So.
Well, that's one of my complaints with Ginsberg. Often he needs to do some editing, in my opinion. So sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But that's like the improvisational musician,
right?
It doesn't work every time, but you go for it. So it's just a stylistic choice. Burroughs experimented with what's called the cut-up method, and that's meant to produce a kind of spontaneity too, right? I mean, it's similar to things that the surrealists did with automatic writing and found poetry.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Tristan Tzara, the Dadaist, would randomly cut phrases out of the newspaper, throw them in a hat, pull them out, and then paste them together, and there's your poem. So there are many different techniques for achieving this kind of spontaneous poetic expression.
Yeah. I guess it's important just to remember that it was a very liberating instinct, right? And that was what they really needed at that time in this like post-war. You could say it's like an existential impulse that they needed, that sense of just like in the same way that Camus would talk about existentialism after the war, right? It's like
Camus was
something new.
Camus was a big fan of American jazz too.
Okay, I didn't know that. That's interesting.
I think Sartre was too.
Okay. So just to add, I think that one of the classic narratives about the Beats is that they are the predecessors to the hippies. So most people probably already know that, but I think that's like a very interesting and important aspect of their presence in art. Do you have any thoughts on that aspect?
Well, I mean, going back to Howl and other poems, and in particular this City Lights edition, which I found online, makes me feel quite nostalgic, because I remember the first time I heard of Ginsberg and saw him was in a Sgt. Pepper Summer of Love documentary. Okay. He was interviewed, and he talked about Dylan and his influence on the Beatles, and he talked about Sgt. Pepper and the Summer of Love and the Berkeley scene and so on. So that was my first encounter with him. And then I remember later I saw this, wasn't a documentary, it was a dramatization of the trial of the Chicago 8.
Okay.
It was on HBO. Elliot Gould was the attorney.
Is it the recent one that came out?
No, not that one.
Okay,
that one. I've seen that one too. No, this is old, man. This is like from the 80s.
Okay.
It was Elliot Gould as the attorney called Mr. Wineglass. I don't remember who was Abby Hoffman. I don't remember who played Ginsberg, but Ginsberg appeared. Apparently, he testified at the trial, and I remember he was featured in the dramatization, and he read a poem called "The Night Apple," which was about a wet dream. And I remember that made an impression because, like, oh, you can write a poem about a wet dream.
Definitely, I had a very similar experience reading his poetry. I mean, this is after I got into Howl, but he wrote poetry about defecating, you know? And in a way, he at least slightly changed my experience of number 2 ever since, because he treated it like as a very sacramental thing.
Yeah, well, which it is. Holy, holy, holy.
Yeah, for sure.
But
yeah, it's very similar, right? In the sense.
Yeah, so those were my first 2 encounters. And then the third encounter is what inspired me. I think I'm remembering this correctly. I think I've got the chronology correct. Then the third encounter is what inspired me to go to the public library and, check out Howl. It was a Lou Reed interview in, I don't know, Rolling Stone or whatever. He was talking about how, his kind of literary songwriting was groundbreaking in the world of pop music, but he said, I've had my predecessors like Burroughs and Hubert Selby and Ginsberg. So that that
it's like
was
a humble brag.
Yeah, well, I think he was trying to acknowledge his debt to them.
Yeah, for sure. But you're still putting yourself in that lineage. But good for him. Why shouldn't he? There's no.
Yeah, I mean, he introduced that kind of transgressive, subject matter to pop music in a way that was unique, and no one else had done it quite like that before. But anyway, after that third encounter, something clicked, and so I went to the public library, and I found that they had that beautiful City Lights edition that we found online. So this is when I was like, in episode 1, I was talking about, discovering Shakespeare's sonnets, and it was around the same time. But I read.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you if you could place it in a time and place.
Well, I read Howl, and then I was also reading Kurt Vonnegut and Norman Mailer, and then the French existentialists, especially Sartre, but Camus as well.
I mean, would you still have been a teenager?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
And then that led me to the French existentialists, led me to the Russians, Dostoevsky, and mostly Dostoevsky.
Yeah. It's interesting.
They kept talking about him. His name, Dostoevsky. That name kept coming up.
Yeah, I mean, I've done so much research around Ginsberg. I mean, maybe that's a bit of an exaggeration. I've watched so many YouTube videos related to Ginsberg in the last couple of weeks, and I think that I might be mistaken here, but I think Ginsberg and Burroughs bonded over their mutual love of Russian literature. It could be wrong, but at least with someone, I know that he had a fondness, and so yeah, that was present for Ginsberg and the company as well. Okay.
Well, you were texting me today about Ginsberg's mom actually having immigrated from Russia, or her
That's
family
right. I think
did?
she was. Yeah, I think she was about 9 or so when she came to the U.S. and she was a sworn Marxist.
Yeah.
Communist, and she raised Alan going to the Wobblies meetings and other communist groups, which he fondly reminisces about in different poems.
Well, I hope we can get into America, because in my opinion, that is the highlight of Howl and other poems.
I absolutely love America, yeah.
Yeah, but we can get into that later. Did you want me to talk about the introduction?
Yep, so we'll get into the poem now. I'll just briefly maybe explain the structure of the poem. You can correct me if I don't do it justice, but there's an intro by William Carlos Williams, which Mark will discuss in a second. Then the poem itself is split into 3 sections. The first is kind of a description of all these madmen, people who have been destroyed by the time period, and that's a crude explanation. But then the second section focuses on this idea of Moloch, which we can discuss different interpretations of Moloch in a little bit. And then the third section is kind of a tribute, love poem to Carl Solomon, who the poem is dedicated to. And then, of course, there's the footnote, which I read at the start of the show.
Yeah.
So, very briefly, the poem, again, as I said, is dedicated to Carl Solomon. I don't know how important he is to Ginsberg's life, but the basic explanation I understand it to be is he's called Carl Solomon a professional lunatic saint. Ginsberg was once arrested for drugs, and I think he managed to avoid imprisonment by instead spending time at the Columbia Presbyterian Psychiatric Institute, which is where he met this writer, Carl Solomon. And I think Carl Solomon's being institutionalized was really crushing for Ginsberg. And in a way, that's a reflection of the whole first section of the poem, which is just discussing this generation destroyed by madness. So, tell us about the intro.
Well, before I get to that, I saw something online today about, I don't know how reliable it is, but apparently Carl Solomon was less than enthusiastic about Howl, and he thought Ginsberg had taken some liberties with his personal story.
Okay.
In a way that he didn't necessarily approve of, but I don't know.
Yeah.
The introduction, written by the well-known poet William Carlos Williams. I mean, well, first of all, there's a personal connection here. WCW was actually Ginsberg's pediatrician in Paterson, New Jersey. Did you know that?
That's crazy, because what I heard is that Ginsberg interviewed him for his high school newspaper.
Well,
maybe they both were. Yeah, I think.
Yeah, that's quite possible. But they knew each other, right? Like William Carlos Williams was friends with Ginsberg's father, who apparently was something of a poet himself.
Right.
And I who knows? Did he go to him for his regular checkups or whatever? But that's kind of an interesting story, right? Like,
very interesting.
He was kind of a mentor for him, and he was actually his family doctor as he's growing up in Paterson, New Jersey. And I don't remember anything about it, but I've actually read William Carlos Williams' epic poem Paterson in its entirety.
Wow.
But I can't tell you anything about it other than Paterson, the city, is personified as a man.
Were you high on peyote?
I wish I had been. Maybe I would have gotten more out of it. But that was many years after I read Howl. But I don't know. As I reread this introduction, I just kept thinking, like, Ferlinghetti, the publisher of City Lights, when he put this book out, he was thinking, okay, we need to have some well-known, established, rather mainstream poet write an introduction to give this a kind of legitimacy. I feel that the intro has that vibe, and
definitely.
I mean, at times it seems like, it's not a long intro, only a couple of pages, but it seems like William Carlos Williams was not particularly impressed with the work itself. He just says, well, he created a well-made poem. He doesn't say, like, this is a revolutionary, poetic statement and a call to arms. He just said, well, this fellow has been through a lot. I'm surprised. I like this line. His ability to survive, travel, and go on writing astonishes me. It's like I never expected much from this little punk, and I don't really understand what it's about, and it's not really like in the tradition that I'm working in. But it's well made, and I wish him luck. And I was asked to write the introduction, so here it is. But of course,
yeah, I think maybe he's impressed with as you said, Ginsberg's suffering, and there's some degree of appreciation just for the journey that it required to produce.
Well,
this poem.
it's documentation, right? But as poetry, he seems less than impressed, right? Here's another line. An arresting poem. Now he turns up 15 or 20 years later with an arresting poem. He doesn't say like an incredible tour de force, an arresting poem, a well-made poem. It's basically like, well, he documented this, psychological breakdown, and that's its value. That's what he seems to be saying. And then, of course, there's the famous concluding line, "Hold back the edges of your gowns, ladies. We are going through hell," which is great.
Which is quite complimentary, right? I mean,
that is. But and it's a great line. But then when I actually reread it, I thought it's not so hellacious, It's more rhapsodic.
For the time, I mean, the imagery that you're getting is intense. I mean, even at my age, one of the reasons I wanted us to get this pod recorded now is because I've been sitting with this poem for a while, and like I kind of need to go somewhere else mentally, because in my opinion, it's there is a lot of darkness and desperation, and I mean, as he describes. Well, I was just going to say in the second paragraph, when we just explore that term howl, he says it is a howl of defeat.
That's what I was going to ask. Do you agree with that?
Well, I think it definitely affected my reading this time around. I mean, that particular interpretation, and not quite defeat, because there's, I think in one of the lines, there's like definitely an exuberance, and it's like being crushed, but at the same time, like laughing about it. Like there's the section about the cops, like biting the cops. Do you remember that part?
Yeah, biting the neck of the cop, or I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I'd like to find the line. I'm just having a quick look here.
I think I know what you're talking about. I mean, I know what you're talking about, but I'm not sure I can locate.
Either way, I would say that's the sentiment that I'm going for. In that people are going down, but they're going down laughing and fighting.
Well, yeah. I mean, I personally don't agree that it's a howl of defeat. I think it's more a howl of triumph. In fact, let's talk about the title. Okay.
Sure.
Howl. What does it make me think of now? It's inescapable. The Walt Whitman quote, "I sound my barbaric yawp over the roofs of the world."
Nice reference.
Yeah, exactly, right? The howl is a barbaric yawp, which the poet sounds over the roofs of the world. That doesn't sound like a howl of defeat. That's a howl of triumph.
Well, the Whitmanian one, I definitely agree with you, but I would say that a howl has a bit more connotation of suffering than, not necessarily. I mean, I guess a coyote howl isn't necessarily suffering, right? But
yeah,
when a person howls, we often say we howl with pain. We don't really howl with joy usually. Maybe we do. I don't know. Do we?
I think we do.
I guess I'm just saying I don't know if it's directly analogous to a yap.
Well,
that's a bit more triumphant, maybe.
Is it? Oh, you say yawp.
Sorry, maybe I don't know. How is this spelled?
A yap.
Y-A-P?
Y-A-W-P. A yap is like
okay.
what my poodles do.
Right.
But yeah, I like the coyote better. I mean, I don't know. I've never heard or seen anything by Ginsberg, saying that it's a direct allusion to that. But that's definitely what I think of. I mean, there's no question that Whitman is primary influence, right?
Sure.
In what was it? The one in the supermarket
in California.
Yeah. I mean, he addresses him directly. "Dear father, graybeard, lonely old courage teacher." And
It's
I
a
think
great poem, by the way. Like, I think one of my friends who I chatted with yesterday, he asked that he could read something for this podcast, and I said, okay, maybe we'll put you in at the end if Mark agrees. Reading Supermarket in California. My favorite line is it just says sorry for the. I guess it's this one. Yeah, I saw you, Walt Whitman, childless, lonely old grubber, poking among the meats in the refrigerator and eyeing the grocery boys.
Yeah. Well, there's another connection he has with Whitman, right? The eyeing of the grocery boys.
Yeah.
Well, I was gonna say, I think it was after reading this and the mention of Whitman, I think this is what inspired me to go purchase my first copy of Leaves of Grass. I mentioned the local B. Dalton bookstore, where I got my first
getting
copy
a lot of your patronage, eh?
Yeah, where I got my first copy of Shakespeare's sonnets, but I think it was Ginsberg that introduced me to Whitman. Like, of course, when I heard about him at school, I didn't give a shit, but then I saw, okay, so
I love me some Whitman. Maybe we need to do Leaves of Grass some.
Well, yeah. Well, I didn't read it in its entirety at the time. It was only later, after reading Henry Miller, that I, read it in its entirety and began to study it more closely. But sorry, if you want to continue, please. Well, one other thing about
Sure.
the Whitman-Ginsberg connection. I remember reading this long ago, and I don't know if it's valid or not, but some scholars said, well, they both, Whitman and Ginsberg, are both inspired by the poetry of the Bible. Whitman's, and that's undeniable with that long line that they both use. But this scholar said, oh, well, Whitman was influenced by the King James Version of the Bible, and Ginsberg was influenced by the Hebrew Bible, the Torah. But
right.
in both cases, they're influenced by the poetic constructions of Holy Writ, as it were. And of course, that's the influence of Blake as well. The long lines of Blake's prophetic works.
Yeah, I'd like us to
I'm
talk
reminded
about the Blake
of
connection at some point.
I'm reminded of those as well. Well, in Sunflower Sutra, that's an allusion to
yes.
Sunflower.
And those two poems, both Ginsberg's and Blake's poem about sunflowers, are two of my favorite poems written ever.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Do you like the Van Gogh paintings of sunflowers?
Yeah, I do, and sunflower is my favorite flower. So
okay, yeah. I'm less inspired by that than you are, I guess, but it's interesting to hear.
So I just thought at least we can discuss. We're not going to have time to discuss the poem on a line-by-line basis. It's just too long. But I think in terms of just our interpretation of the word howl and kind of what it means, maybe just at least looking at the first iconic line might be useful. So I'll just read it quickly.
Mm-hmm.
I did memorize it, but I don't trust myself now, so I'll read it. I saw the best minds of my generation destroyed by madness, starving, hysterical, naked, dragging themselves through the Negro streets at dawn, looking for an angry fix. That's the line that is imprinted in most people's minds when they think about Howl, and probably Ginsberg's most famous line ever, unless you pull something out of America, which might have some competition. But still, I would say this is probably his most famous line ever. What do you make of this first section?
Well, the phrase "my generation" is key, isn't it? Like, there's an implicit recognition of some kind of generational conflict. This generation that he associates himself with is struggling to I don't know, stake out its own identity in contrast to previous generations.
But I think the word destroyed, if we come back to WCW's idea that this is a howl of defeat, you can see where he gets that. I mean, they were destroyed. They're starving. They're hysterical. They're naked.
True.
They're at wit's end, and they have this drug addiction because they're looking for a fix, right? So, so there is definitely an element of tragedy in the beginning, if nothing else.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm reading it in 2022 is not the same as reading it in, what was it, when did it first come out? 1956.
Right.
It seems almost tame now in a way, but yeah, at that time it would have been more explosive, I guess.
But it feels like an accusation. You know what I'm saying? It's like, look what you did to me and my friends. Look what you did to us.
Absolutely. But that I'm also, of course, that phrase "my generation" reminds me of the Who rock anthem that would appear on the airwaves 10 years later or so.
But that's more positive, isn't it? That song. It's more celebratory, or no?
No, hope I die before I get old.
Ah, okay.
People try to put us down just because we get around.
Yeah. So
things they do look awful cold. Hope I die before I get old. So there's like a confrontational attitude towards, of course, the elderly generation, or the previous generation, the generation of the parents. But I was just gonna say, like, of course, that phrase, I saw the best minds of my generation destroyed by madness. That is part of the culture now, right? Like, everyone knows that. But there are other very striking phrases, some of which I highlighted here. I love.
Well, just really quickly though, how much?
Yeah.
Sorry to cut you off. I mean, if we agree that, if we're willing to concede that many of his friends or his circle were destroyed by madness, like, how much do we put that on to the greater society as a whole, and how much do we put that on, like, blame them a little bit for their recklessness?
Well,
yeah,
it probably has to be
both,
a little bit of both to some degree, but I don't know. Are we doing percentages? I'm gonna say I'm gonna say that the America they grew up in was not particularly nourishing. So
right.
I mean, it's a commentary on the ugly Cold War environment of the 50s, and surprisingly, or perhaps not surprisingly, it's still very relevant today, especially if you look at a piece like America.
Oh yeah, it's crazy reading it, and
yeah, it's unbelievable. And that was the one that made the biggest impression on me. When I first read this, and still today, I think that's a great one. But if we're still looking at Howl, I just want to share a few other phrases that I always, I felt like there's a lot of dross, let's say, a lot of if we're thinking of it, a lot of fat, and if we're thinking of it as like a jazz solo, there are a lot of unnecessary notes, but occasionally he'll hit on something that really clicks,
Well, just before you get into that, maybe it's interesting to keep in mind that allegedly this is the result of like a peyote trip, right? I don't know if it was, I think it was written after the trip itself. And also I think that initially he wasn't intended for publishing. Like, it was just kind of his notes. Mm-hmm. And then someone encouraged him, like, this is the kind of stuff we should be writing, like the no filter, first thought, best thought kind of thing. And that's when it, he decided, okay, fuck it.
Yeah.
But I'm just saying that might account for the fat to some extent. But go on.
Sure. Well, I do wonder what he was on. You hear peyote. What
Peyote,
did
yeah.
supposedly Kerouac wrote On the Road on what? Speed? Benzedrine?
Benzedrine, yeah.
Which is a
It's
kind
an
of
upper,
speed.
though. Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of speed, right? So, I don't know. I just want to randomly throw out some phrases that always
Go for it.
I always found striking, and I highlighted them again. The scholars of war. I love that. Cock and endless balls.
I love that.
I remember when I when I saw that as a teen, I'm like, what the fuck? Peyote
Right.
solidities of halls. Here's one. Hydrogen jukebox. Now this is interesting because later he would collaborate, Ginsberg that is, would collaborate with the composer Philip Glass, and
Right. Yep.
they took this phrase, and I don't know, I think Glass composed an opera called Hydrogen Jukebox, and then Ginsberg wrote the book to the
Nice.
opera, and later this is another interesting connection. Like later, Glass wrote music. Well, he did like a symphonic version of Bowie's Low. Did you know about that?
No. That
Yeah.
sounds interesting.
Yeah, so since our next episode is on Bowie's Berlin trilogy,
Right.
that's another connection.
Okay, I get to say a phrase now. I get to say
Yeah.
a phrase. Who sweetened the snatches of a million girls trembling in the sunset, and were red-eyed in the morning, but prepared to sweeten the snatch of the sunrise, flashing buttocks under barns and naked in the lake.
Oh,
I love
I have
sweetening
that
snatches.
one. I have that one highlighted
Nice,
too.
good. I'm
And
glad I stole it.
And right before that, a vision of ultimate cunt.
Yeah.
Don't forget
That's
that.
nice.
But this one seemed apropos as well. Platonic conversationalists. Hey, that's us. That's what we're doing on
Yep.
texting. We're platonic
By the way, like, did you-
conversationalists.
I know you at least opened up the video, which is the extended interview with William Buckley. Did you watch much of it?
I watched it all earlier today.
Okay, because it's interesting just how they were discussing the idea of like what is obscenity, right? And Ginsberg was insisting that you need to hear me read this poem, and you're going to hear these words in a way that's more innocent and more sweet. Like especially all the body parts. I mean, I think he's really trying to reclaim the way that we perceive all these words like cunt and cock and balls. I mean, it's with a fondness, it's with a tenderness, and I think that's why it would have been just insane. I mean, for not just for that reason, but it would have been insane to censor it because it's a sacramental approach to the body.
Yeah, but you can't explain that to someone like William F. Buckley. I mean, he is, in that interview, he's so fucking condescending. He's insufferable, odious. I mean, he's, and moronic,
But you know that actually Kerouac, for example, admired him to some extent because of his his more intellectual background. I mean, I guess he is like someone who's fairly well read. I don't know much about him, but
Well,
yeah.
Gore Vidal did not share that admiration.
Okay, at least he had Ginsberg on.
Gore,
And did you see him bust into the Hare Krishna?
yeah, that was interesting.
That was cool.
And that long poem about a mescaline trip, or it was an LSD trip.
the one about, I think he wrote it in Wales.
Yeah. That was a
called
bit.
Albion. That was nice. I
That's
liked it.
another one that could have used some editing, but yeah, there's some nice phrases in it.
Yeah.
Gore Vidal is someone we need to. I think there's an essay of his called "On Drugs." I think we need to.
Okay. I got a couple people in my circle who are Gore Vidal fans. I haven't read.
Oh, absolutely. I'm very much a fan of his work. I'm reading his American series of novels, and then there's Creation and Julian. Like his historical novels are amazing. But
nice.
he's got an entire, what is it? I think it's a heptalogy. Like there's 7 novels on American history, basically, because as he says, we live in the United States of amnesia. Well, we don't live there now, but we're from there. So
Let's jump into
we're
section
getting off
2
track.
a tiny
No,
bit.
hold
Yeah,
on,
so-
hold on.
Okay.
One more phrase.
Okay, go for
This
it,
is
go for
crucial. Run down by the drunken taxicabs of absolute reality.
Nice.
Yeah, that's a great one. That one is.
I mean,
I
and
don't
I
remember
think-
where I first heard that, but I do remember that when I read it, it was familiar because I'd heard it like in a movie or something.
Well, and my dad was saying one thing that frustrates him about modern poetry, and he doesn't really know Ginsberg very well, but is that he doesn't get it, right? Like he doesn't, and I think that's a kind of a common experience for people about poetry, especially more modern poetry. But I think that this poem is nice because, yeah, you don't get every line. Not every line speaks to you, but there's enough there to enjoy, just in the sensual aspect of like images that stick out to you, the ones that we've read out. So I think that provides satisfaction in itself, you know, and that's success in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to appreciate each line. So can I jump to section 2 a little bit?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is the Moloch section. I'm going to give some reference points for the idea of Moloch, and you're welcome to jump in. Moloch is associated with child sacrifice. Moloch appears in Milton's Paradise Lost, and it's not necessarily related to Christianity, but to Canaanite. It's a Canaanite god. Either way, it's like it can be a bad angel, it can be a demon. Karl Marx referred to money as a Moloch.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's something fearful, and for Ginsberg, I'd say it represents like industry, money. Do you want to add to that?
No, I think that's apt. I mean, it's like, you know, the Moloch of Cold War America in the 50s.
Have you ever used the word Moloch in any of your work?
I think I did long ago, yeah.
Okay.
And I used it, I guess, basically in the sense that you say Marx did.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So, any lines you want to pull out here? I mean, this is
No.
Moloch who frightened me out of my natural ecstasy. So again, that's like the natural ecstasy of these poets, right? All these great minds of the generation were naturally ecstatic, and they were all became victims of this cold world.
Mm-hmm.
From so I think that's apt. And
Actually, I did highlight a couple of lines.
okay.
Granite Cox.
Okay.
Whatever that
It's
means.
good to have a
But no,
granite
this one is interesting here. Dreams, adorations, illuminations, religions, the whole boatload of sensitive bullshit.
Which is nice, right? To
Yeah.
have that ability to like laugh at himself.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's how Moloch would see, you know, poetry basically. It's like
Right.
that doesn't serve the interests of industry and, you know, the military industrial complex and money.
Right.
That's just sensitive bullshit. You know, get with the program.
Absolutely. Okay. So the final section is about Carl Solomon. It's this repetition of "I'm with you" in Rockland.
Which
And-
wasn't the actual place.
Do you remember where Rockland is? I think
Well,
I
it's
looked it up. I think
it's
it's outside of New York.
Well, it's apparently it's the site of a mental hospital, but it's not the one that Carl Solomon was in.
Okay.
Apparently, so he just chose it. Ginsberg chose Rockland for, you know, poetic reasons. It just sounded better, allegedly.
So, anything you want to say about Section 3?
Well, I read today that Carl Solomon was an acolyte of Artaud, the French dramatist and actor, and I mean, he's a unique character. Have you ever read The Theater and Its Double?
No.
I love Artaud.
Okay.
He also became fascinated with Balinese theater, and he's his contribution to drama, 20th century drama, is the theater of cruelty, right? Like, he breaks down the barrier between performer and audience, and the purpose of the performance is to terrify the audience. Like a theater history professor explained at one time by saying, you've already experienced more horrors than any people in human history have experienced, so we're going to bring that to the theater. We're not going to pretend that you're just neutral spectators observing some amusement on the stage, right? So the actors confront the audience. They walk amongst the people in the seats, and they might shout at them. They might shake them. All kinds of crazy things happened at these theater of cruelty performances. And Artaud himself was institutionalized. I think he was subjected to like electroshock therapy, just like Carl Solomon. Interestingly, Lou Reed was as well. Like Lou Reed, his parents tried to like shock the gay out of him, so they sent him to some upstate New York institution where he had this electroshock therapy, and he said it fucked him up. He had memory problems, and this is why
I can't remember when I had this experience, but with one of my therapists, at some point, I remember bringing up electroshock therapy, like kind of in a joking sense.
Yeah.
And the therapist was like slightly defensive of it and saying like that it gets a bad rap and that actually like it's had some pretty good results.
Yeah. And then he or she is like, don't you want to try it?
Well, I think I was at my most insane when I brought it up, to the point where I really thought I might need a couple zaps. But
when was this?
I think it was in Morocco.
Oh my. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad you didn't do that.
Yeah, I just took antidepressants instead, which are prescribed by Pfizer, and it was much better.
Yeah, right. Too bad you didn't have like peyote or.
I'll just tell you my little peyote story. It's like it's kind of an anticlimactic story, but we got some peyote in Tucson my sophomore year of college, and I was like too much of a chicken to take the recommended dose. Mm-hmm. So like me and my roommate just took like a little sip, and one of the negative side effects is supposed to be that like you kind of feel like you have to pee all the time even after you've peed. Mm-hmm. And basically I got that side effects, and we were both kind of like sitting in different parts of our backyard just like with our cocks out, like tinkling little peepees, but we didn't trip. Maybe that's a good thing, but the next day I was still like I couldn't really read, and I was like really I mean it's an intense drug, I guess. I mean, but I guess I associate it somewhat with like the Southwest, right? So like being from Tucson, I guess you're not that far away from places where they take it on reservations in more of like a ritualistic form.
Oh yeah. Well, was it actual peyote, or did you have mescaline?
I don't know what the exact difference is.
Well, the mescaline.
I know the word we were using was peyote.
Well, the peyote is the actual cactus.
The cactus, right?
But the mescaline is a synthesized version of it.
I have a feeling it was more like the actual raw deal. Raw stuff.
Yeah. Well, you're lucky that you got that. And now there are like restrictions because that's a sacred medicine for, and there's a limited amount of that. So, I think if I were going to do it, I would try to get the mescaline and leave the real stuff to the people who use that as a sacrament in their religion.
Right.
We don't need these white, drug tourists taking their limited supply of religious sacraments. There you can get.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it depends on
mescaline.
how you approached it, right?
Well,
If
you can get
approached it with
mescaline.
reverence.
No, I'm just saying like that.
I get you.
They've been brutalized enough. Leave their fucking peyote alone. Just get some mescaline if you want to take it.
Sure.
This is the conclusion I've come to after watching Michael Pollan's How to Change Your Mind, but we ought to do an episode on that at some point.
Sure.
But anyway, let's
footnote to Howl. Footnote to Howl, really quickly. I don't think we need to go too much into this because
you read it.
I alluded to it. Well, I read it and I alluded to it a lot in our Cave Holy Moment episode. So I just want to again stress that connection to the holy moment idea that Cave was talking about, and that was probably one of the reasons why that scene stuck out to me, because I really loved this footnote to Howl. And one more time I'll reiterate that I love this approach to life, even if it is a bit over the top and a bit exhausting. But I think I love Ginsberg's sentiment, and I think as a footnote to Howl, it's like a nice digestif, or something that makes it more palatable and leaves you with a more optimistic feeling, right? Because it's much more triumphant than the lines that, well, especially than the opening of Howl. Mm-hmm. Even though we did pull out some sections that were more playful and fun, but yeah, this is definitely not defeatist in any way.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah. Okay. So
can we talk about America? I mean, we briefly referenced a supermarket in California. I don't have much more to say about that, but and we can skip over transcription of organ music, which is.
We're an hour in, so
yeah, I know
we can do.
And Sunflower Sutra we briefly touched upon, but America, come on, we got to talk about America because
unless we give it its own episode sometime.
No, let's talk about it now. We're here. Let's do it. Let's do it.
All right.
I mean, we've talked about the influence of Whitman, Blake. When I read this, I think about Pablo Neruda, and I wonder if Ginsberg had read any Neruda. This to me is like something from Canto General. It's like. Have you read La United?
I don't know Neruda well.
La United Fruit Company.
Is that by Neruda?
Yeah.
I'm just surprised to hear you say that, because as someone who doesn't really know Neruda at all, I would guess that America is so kind of full of pop culture and politics and stuff like that. Does Neruda have also?
Yes,
that
man.
really
That's what.
Okay,
that's
I didn't
what
realize that.
Canto General is. It's a political epic. You're probably thinking of the Neruda of what is it? 10 love songs and a song of despair.
Yeah. That is what
or 20. Yeah. I think it's 20 love songs. And
I'm thinking of him as very lyrical.
Well, it is. I mean, yes,
right.
But that was early Neruda. That's maybe his most famous book. But I think he can. Well, there's so many different periods of Neruda. And, I didn't discover him until later, but he's, as a poet, to me, he's far superior to Ginsberg. But I just wonder.
Let's respect Ginsberg on his podcast.
Well, I just wonder. I just wonder if there was some influence there, because, there, in a way, you could say that Neruda, in that period, is a master of the poetry of political satire, and I wonder if Ginsberg was aware of Neruda at that time. I know that other American poets like Robert Bly, he was influenced by Neruda.
Let's come back to Ginsberg, if you don't mind, because it's hard for me to follow the reference.
Yeah, well...
Talk to me about America.
Okay, all right. Why do I like it? Let's just talk about certain lines. Go fuck yourself with your atom bomb.
Mm-hmm. So many. I mean, every line I feel like is iconic.
This
It's a lot tighter.
This one, yes, it's tighter. It's tighter. There's less fat, as you say. This line always delighted me. When can I go into the supermarket and buy what I need with my good looks?
Yeah,
It's so
totally a great line.
it's so outrageous, so absurdist. Well, again, Neruda. It reminds me of that. America, the plum blossoms are falling. America, I used to be a communist when I was a kid. I'm not sorry.
Yeah, great line. I smoke marijuana every chance I get.
Yes.
I know it's a simple line, but it's just a classic line.
You should have seen me reading Marx.
Yeah. America, I still haven't told you what you did to Uncle Max after he came over from Russia.
Yes.
And then, of course, are you going to let your emotional life be run by Time magazine?
I've got that one highlighted too.
Yeah.
My ambition is to be president, despite the fact that I'm a Catholic.
Yeah.
Just a few
Kennedy
years before Kennedy is actually elected. I will continue like Henry Ford. My strophes are as individual as his automobiles.
What are strophes, by the way?
More so, they're all different sexes. Well, it's like a unit of verse.
Okay, I guess it was something like that.
And then, America, you don't really want to go to war. America, it's them bad Russians. Them Russians, and them Chinamen, and them Russians. The Russia wants to eat us alive. The Russia's power mad. She wants to take our cars from out our garages. I laughed my ass off when I first read that. That's so great, you know?
Yeah. And
it's still, and it could have been
so
written
relevant.
5 minutes ago.
Right. I mean, these two boogeymen are
Here they are
just,
again, you know?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then immediately after that, the American Indians and the descendants of black slaves, right? So all of the ugliness and the contradictions of Cold War 1950s America, which have never gone away, you know, they're all lampooned in this. It's great satire, and in an absurdist kind of way.
And I would say just the structure of it is less what we think of as traditional poetry, and almost like something that could be read as stand-up or, right?
It's like a, well, episode number 5 was about George Carlin and his routines. There's something about that here too,
for sure.
And I think Burroughs referred to some of his certain parts of Naked Lunch. I think he called them routines. They're kind of like these verbal collages.
I think we should give America a little bit of credit or give the people of America, like Ginsberg, some credit for helping us along with our attitude towards queer culture, though, because that aspect is definitely more celebrated now, and mainly in a good way, I would say. Well,
but it was all against the grain, right? I mean, this didn't come from the mainstream. It took these.
Sure,
these
that's
outlaws.
why I wanted to credit Ginsberg.
Yeah,
with that.
but
let's give them. Yeah, they
well,
have.
Burroughs
too.
Burroughs too, and Burroughs talked about, or I don't know, some Burroughs commentators have talked about queering the text. You know, you do something to twist it and undermine it, subvert. It subverts itself. The text subverts itself. In a way that it is at the same time doing a kind of culture jamming and subverting the mainstream.
So, can I just say some random stuff about the beat movement now? Is that cool?
Of course.
Okay, so I'm going to give you a little bit of just some flavor stuff, and then you react as you want. So, basically, I went to university in Tucson. Tucson, from my life experiences, is one of the most beat places I've ever been. And what do I mean by that? I mean that there's a kind of a mystery, a romanticism to the types of characters that you'll find just on the street, riding their bikes. A lot of people smoke. You'll smell a lot of weed around and other psychedelics. A lot of coffee shops, and not particularly commercialized, especially in the area close to the university and then downtown. Like it just had a magic, a bohemian magic that I haven't felt anywhere else in the world. And the kind of characters that I met who weren't even really university students, they were more like people that just like we kind of bumped into, and I was like becoming something of a bohemian at the time, even if I was like a middle class bohemian. But the kind of characters I met were, I could feel a strong influence of the beats in them, and they were true characters. I mean, they were crashing on people's couches, they were writing poems, they were dressing really uniquely, and there's just a spirit that I really admired, and that like I felt a bit like to some of the characters I met, I felt a bit like Kerouac felt to Cassidy. You know, I was just documenting, I was writing about how I was impressed by their courage, by their rebelliousness. You were in awe of them in a way. I was in awe, yeah. And I just wonder, like, without sounding like grandpa or without speaking down to the young generation, like, you know, can we get this kind of spirit today in our, and again, we have kind of talked about this stuff, but like in our world of phones, like does the modern beatnik have a phone, for example? What is the modern beatnik, and how can we get a movement that is meaningful today that responds to the world that we clearly are like pretty disillusioned with in many ways, especially politically? So what do you think about any of that?
That's a big question. I mean, yeah. In terms of a movement, well, first of all, was there a beat movement, or was that just a creation of the media? You know, did they just decide? I mean, it's like,
but there was a lifestyle.
Yeah,
right?
But it's not, you know, codified. It's basically just various individuals in various, you know, forms of voluntary association.
But the traveling, the odd jobs, the writing,
yeah, well, we're still doing it, aren't we? I mean, we're both expats, and we're both writing, and we're both creating. Now we're trying,
but we're more tied down to, you know, I'd say we're more tied to institutions. Like we're using like things that are very centralized. I mean, you could say that, yeah, they were using currency and stuff like that, right? So like, it's not like you can go completely off the map, but I guess.
Well, so are they. I mean, you know, Burroughs is the heir to the Burroughs computer fortune. When he got in trouble in Mexico, you know, for basically killing his wife while playing William Tell, and you know,
I haven't thought about that story for a while.
Yeah, and
that's some crazy
that
shit.
Was, you know, drugs were involved there. Like his family got him out of that legal scrape, and you know, Ginsberg, he mentions in that Buckley interview, his brother was a lawyer and helped him when I think he was gonna get busted for drugs or something, and his brother, the lawyer, helped him publicize the case or something, and you know, they had the support of the ACLU and so on. So there was institutional support. It's not like as freewheeling as, I mean, you could say that we're more. We have less institutional support and are more like outside the mainstream than they were.
Well, let's talk about in a larger sense, though, in terms of like movements. Like we've seen movements today, like, and I'm not being disparaging to these movements. I think there's like good things and bad things about them. But like Black Lives Matter. What else can I put in that? Like, are there other movements that I'm missing out on? I mean, I guess you could say like QAnon, but I don't see that as a progressive movement. But
That's not
like,
very beat.
can we get like a hippie movement today? Can we get something that's like truly counterculture and truly rebellious to the institutions that exist, whether it's like social media as the institutions that we're rebelling against, or corporations or governments? Like, what is, can there be a big movement against that? Like, is that possible in today's world?
Again, that's a big question. I mean,
Yeah.
like, what happens when you revolt against that? I guess one answer is you end up like Julian Assange or Chelsea Manning. They're going to come for you.
But again, those are individuals, right? Those are individuals. But like a movement of like that's based in art as well.
Yeah.
And lifestyle.
Well, I mean, I don't know. We can't really wait for the movement to happen, can we? We have to just do what we do. Like I'm trying to. That is my life. I create. I write books. I make music. That's what I do.
Yeah,
what
but don't
else
you feel
can
like
I
an
do?
individual in that sense?
Yeah,
but I'm just saying.
There are various forms of collaboration. You and I are collaborating on a podcast. If I start another podcast, I'll probably collaborate with someone else.
For sure. I mean, we had the co-reality movement. That
that was our attempt to do something like that as expats in Korea. But when I do music, I'm always collaborating, and that's one of the great joys of recording music, right? Like I write a song, and then I have an outline and a rough idea of what I want to do, but the musicians always bring something of their own and make it so much better in ways that I never could have imagined. That's the beauty of collaboration. And then
and I'm not taking away from any of that or from the efforts of artists today. I think there's incredible artists. I'm just saying, like, can something happen to make a real like shift to what we consider like the culture?
I just cannot think in those terms. I can't control all that. If something like that happens, then I'll try to support it in any way I can, and I'll try to be a part of it. But I can't.
I guess I'm asking: has it become more difficult, like with the way that things have become centralized?
That may be because I think the forces of reaction and the protectors of the status quo have gotten smarter, right?
And I think surveillance has just reached levels that we just didn't have in the past.
Right. I mean, in the, let's say, the heyday of the beats, there were still hobos, people like riding
that's what I'm saying.
in boxcars and just, now that shit gets shut down much more quickly. I mean,
maybe India has more of those kind of like, you can still be a wandering spirit because they're just, there isn't the infrastructure there yet to implement a type of police state.
Yeah, maybe so. I mean, I don't know.
It's kind of sad to me.
Yes, very much so. If I reflect on that too deeply, I'll become demoralized. That's why I just focus on doing what I can do, because I can't control all that other shit, and I can't wait around for a so-called movement to save me, and I'm not going to be saved anyway.
And I'm not even saying we need to be saved. It would be amazing if people could rise up in some way. I mean, I guess you still have revolutions, so that's what you can consider like a movement. I don't know if the Arab Spring, that could be considered a movement of sorts,
which got co-opted.
Well, yeah, but I mean, people still have power. I mean, there's a lot of strike action going on in the UK, for example. For better or worse, we're probably going to see a lot more environmental activism. I don't say for better or worse, like meaning that it's ever for worse, except for the fact that sometimes maybe it can be misguided, but as all things can be. But in general, I support like that direction. But
Well, I mean, there's
we'll probably see something related to that.
well, there's
environment.
Richard Wolff's idea of the worker co-ops, right? Like trying to bring democracy to the workplace.
Mm-hmm.
That's his suggested solution, and I think it's a good one. You got to try to democratize the workplace where you spend most of your waking hours. Like if
We're seeing a lot of unionization now, right?
yeah, well,
Like,
we
more so
have
than
to.
in the past.
I think we have to support that.
Sure.
But if you're not free in your workplace where you spend most of your time, you're not free. There's no democracy, right? If the place where you spend most of your waking hours is a top-down hierarchical, pyramid structure that is oppressing you and exploiting you.
Yep. Let's end with a question then that maybe we can both answer, and that's just like how the beats have influenced us as people or as artists. Does that sound reasonable, like a final question?
Well, I think I've already answered it. I mean, for me, it's Burroughs.
Okay.
Like apart from the this was fun to revisit Howl, and I still feel like for me the highlight is this brilliant piece, America. That's still my favorite, more so than Howl. But as if we're taking the beats all together, the most influential of those writers for me is Burroughs by far. I mean, he
See, Burroughs hasn't done it for me,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm
Well,
willing
what
to
have
go
you
back
read?
and revisit, but I read Junkie, which kept my attention, but
That's
it's kind of. I felt like it's like almost like a genre piece.
That's an
'cause it's
early work.
And then I tried to read Naked Lunch, and it was so twisted, and like I just like didn't have the stomach for it.
That's pretty early too. Try the Red Knight trilogy. That is incredible. Speaking of trilogies, our next episode is Berlin trilogy, but Red Knight trilogy, amazing.
Okay, well then let me just add that for me, the beats were hugely influential. Kerouac, my favorite text is probably Kerouac's Dharma Bums, although On the Road is great as well. But Dharma Bums just had this like exuberance. I loved the passion for nature, which obviously has like a connection to the Romantics as well, and like that whole lineage is really important to me, starting with the English Romantics. I mean, obviously I don't want to limit it because whatever I say I'm going to leave people out, but yeah, the English Romantics, you're going to throw in Coleridge, you're going to throw in Wordsworth, Blake, then to Whitman. So that whole lineage is really important to me. And then as far as like pushing me to explore Eastern religions, that was massive. Like I still answer the question of like what's my religious identity. I still often answer it as like a somewhat, like a partial Buddhist, and it's all due to the beats because they really pushed me to explore ideas that I found hugely liberating, hugely profound, and I think that. So that would be like, so they had I'm just saying they had a huge influence on my spirituality, as well as my approach to art. I'm thankful to them for that.
Yeah, I thought of that when you mentioned the title, The Dharma Bums. That may be their most valuable contribution as a movement. I mean, that you don't get that so much from Burroughs, but from Kerouac and Ginsberg. Ginsberg may be the most important in that regard. Like this openness to Eastern religions, meditation. This is something that the Beatles picked up on when they went to India, and that was already in the culture. The Beats laid the groundwork for that. You had the Maharishi coming to the West. I think they opened a lot of yoga. I think they opened a lot of doors in that regard. The Tibetan religion and religious practices and meditation. So yeah, that has been hugely influential, not only to the culture but to me personally as well.
Yeah. Okay. Should we end it there? I think that's
that's a good place to end it.
Good. Do you want to give us a 30-second teaser about the next episode?
Well, the next episode, I believe, will focus on David Bowie's so-called Berlin trilogy, and that is the 3 albums Low, Heroes, and Lodger, which to me, that's like the highlight of Bowie's career.
Nice. So if you're a regular listener, find those albums on your preferred listening platform and start listening, and you'll get even more out of the next episode, I think, if you've got some first-hand context.
Sounds good.
Okay. Until the next episode. Peace out, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Texting.